Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is second bite at the cherry in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 26, Alliances, Intermission Part 5. The alarm blasted into Naruto's ears, and with a manic flinch he slammed his fist against the off switch. 6 hours, supposedly, since he'd crashed here last night, but he felt as though it might as well have been 2. His brain was still muddled, but his body, ever fueled by the Dem Fox, felt energetic and ready to go. Which was good, because he knew what would happen to him if he was late. He went straight to the shower to start, not even bothering to dry his hair after, as he then went to his kitchen. Taped onto his fridge was a weekly schedule, and next to it a list of simple recipes. Today, he would heat up toast, eggs, and a fruit of his choice, along with carefully jarred jam, courtesy of the Akimichi clan. Naruto would have just enough time to finish the last of his toast when a knock sounded on the door. Hastily, toast still halfway in his mouth, Naruto ran to his front door. First came on the boots, then his jacket, and finally his shinobi equipment. 30 seconds from the knock until Naruto opened the door. Ino Yamanaka stood at the door, foot tapping impatiently as she stared at a wristwatch. "You could set your alarm 5 minutes earlier, you know." "But I need every damn minute, Ino, you've seen how hard Pervy Sage has been working me," Naruto whined, locking his door behind him. "He's determined to kill me after I gave him the slip last month." Ino gently knocked a fist against the side of Naruto's head. "Then maybe don't be so reckless next time, idiot." Naruto laughed. They both knew Reckless was Naruto's middle name. With that, the two were off. It was still dark, and the cold of winter had already begun to set in. Small flakes of snow had settled on the Konoha rooftops, but Naruto and Ino left no trace of footsteps as they flew through the night. "Which one do you want to take today?" "Well, I took Chuji yesterday, so this time you get him," Naruto offered. Chuji was the easier of the two. All Ino would have to do to wake him up was wag some bacon in his general direction. Shikamaru, however. The Nara was a nightmare. Ino seemed grateful for the reprieve, and as they approached the clan compounds, the two split off. The Nara compounds were peaceful, surrounded by woodland and generally quiet. Naruto had learned that Shikamaru wasn't the only one of his family with a lazy streak. It seemed more a clan trait. With a small thud, Naruto landed on the roof of Shikamaru's house. If he could catch Shikamaru off guard, it would be easier, but the bastard would do anything for an extra hour of snoozing. Ino had claimed last time that Shikamaru had even gone so far as to set up traps. For a lazy bastard, he sure was dedicated. Jiraiya had taught Naruto how to begin masking his chakra. It was a difficult feat for Naruto, as he had far more chakra than the average shinobi, so Naruto considered this a challenge in the works. He concentrated, pulling his energy inward, and sending a quick thought to the fox to keep his shit together. He could have sworn he heard the fox grumble at that. Quietly, Naruto reached for the latch on Shikamaru's window. Locked, but Ino had shown him basic lock-picking weeks ago. Any shinobi needed to know how to break into a home, she'd lectured, especially a team that specialized in infiltration. Naruto grabbed a couple of small tools from his pouch and popped the window open in less than a minute. Step 1 down. He saw a bundle in the bed inside, wrapped up so tightly that he could barely tell it was Shikamaru. Naruto frowned. He'd been around this block before. Without bothering to be quiet now, he walked over to the bed and threw the covers off. A wooden decoy. That son of a bitch. Now it became a game of tracking. Naruto only wished he had access to Kakashi's shinobi puppies, but what he did have was numbers. With a quick hand sign, he summoned a dozen clones. "Scatter through the compound until we find him." There was a chorus of agreement, and then all 12 Narutos jumped through the window and into the night. The final, original Naruto quickly hid inside Shikamaru's closet. The past several times, Shikamaru had hidden himself in other buildings, once even in his own parents' room. If he had gone for a new hiding spot, he'd be found. But Shikamaru was a smart guy, and something told Naruto that maybe this time, if he just waited. There was movement underneath Shikamaru's bed, and after a moment Shikamaru himself crawled out with a yawn. He looked around before sleepily pulling himself into bed. Naruto grinned. I caught you, lazy ass. Shikamaru flinched, flailing to get out of bed but failing as Naruto pounced on top of him. There was a brief struggle, a few punches and kicks thrown, before Shikamaru was promptly tossed into his closet by a triumphant Naruto. Get dressed and get ready for missions. Are you a Chunin or not? I didn't ask for that troublesome promotion. He heard Shikamaru answer. It was dumped on me. You can have it. No getting out of this one, team leader. Shikamaru grumbled, but when he came of the closet he was dressed and ready to go. Ino had been equally successful. When they met at the front of Shikamaru's house, it was with Chuji in tow, munching on a similar piece of toast to the one Naruto had made that morning. Lucky you, getting Ino. Shikamaru grumped as they walked to the Hokage's office. She won't give you a black eye first thing in the morning. Maybe if you didn't try to run away. Naruto protested. If you brought me toast instead of violence, maybe I wouldn't run away. Lazy ass. Idiot. Chuji laughed. You know, mornings have been way more interesting since Naruto joined up. Naruto's super fantastic schedule for becoming Hokage started with missions. Unlike under Team 7, Shikamaru's squad focused on reconnaissance and capture missions, which Jiraiya claimed to be his specialty. Naruto had to focus on concealing himself, blending in, and learning how best to speak with others without giving evidence that he was really spying. His henjutsu proved invaluable. Nobody, it seemed, could make a disguise better than Naruto could. Naruto's job was to find the target. Chuji's job was to position the target. Shikamaru went for the capture, and Ino went for the interrogation. It worked, surprisingly well. It had taken Naruto several weeks to get anywhere remotely good enough at information gathering, but now he was certain he was the best damn spy in Konoha. Jiraiya insisted he had a long way to go, but Naruto knew better. Lunch with the team ended most missions, and then Naruto trudged up to Tsunade's office for studying. The woman was ruthless. Every day she sat him down with stacks of books about Konoha history, Konoha laws, governance, clans, trials, everything, she claimed, a Hokage would have to know in order to successfully run a village. She would quiz him relentlessly as he read, and every time he got a question wrong, she made him run a message across the village for her. Naruto started out getting a lot of questions wrong. But slowly he was finding that some of it was beginning to sink. Even if he didn't know the exact details behind how the Aburame and the Nara had decided on clan borders, he was starting to remember the big picture. The laws began to look familiar. And the paperwork, the never-ending paperwork that Tsunade seemed constantly drowning in, started to look less and less intimidating. This one is from a family applying for citizenship. Tsunade told him that afternoon. So I have a job for you. You need to go and confirm that they've been living here as long as they've claimed, and make sure they aren't troublemakers. Naruto loved it when Tsunade sent him on errands like this. For one, it wasn't bookwork. But for two, well, at first he'd hated these missions. The locals refused to talk to him as always, and it had taken a bunch of pleading and claiming it was work for the Hokage until most people bothered to talk to him at all. But now, after weeks of running similar errands, things had changed. Some people smiled at him when they saw him rushing by. Some people even waved or greeted him. And most importantly, he didn't see people scowling anymore or muttering as he passed them. Maybe Tsunade was a hard ass when it came to studying, but sending him out here on these errands. It made him feel like a part of something. And perhaps that's why she continued to send him off, since Naruto always came back to her office with a big grin, ready to try and hit the books once again. Dinner time came quickly, and from there Jiraiya would take him out to one of the training grounds and work him to the bone. Elemental manipulation was difficult for even Jounin to master. Naruto was still barely a genin, and Jiraiya had talked him with taking the Raise Non, an S-ranked jutsu that he still needed a clone to help perform, and adding his wind element to it. It had been weeks with no progress. Evenings were the most frustrating part of the day. By then he was already tired from missions and running about, and he didn't want to waste energy on a jutsu that he wasn't even sure was possible. But, as Jiraiya pointed out, it would be really cool if he could figure it out. And that was all the motivation Naruto needed. Fire took strength from wind, wind negated lightning, lightning disabled earth, earth overtook water, and water quenched fire. Jiraiya pounded this concept into his head. Against Sasuke's Chidori, Naruto would succeed using his wind element. But all Naruto could consider is that he could be the wind to fan Sasuke's flames and lead him to success. Naruto wondered, briefly, what elements Sakura might have. He'd have to ask her when Kakashi brought her back. It had been months since Sakura had gone. Months. But Kakashi was going to bring her back soon. Wasn't he? For the first time since Sasuke had arrived in the Land of Sound, he was alone. Orochimaru had a mission that required his extended absence, and Kabuto, of course, would be ever present at his side. Sasuke had secretly wanted to join them, if only to keep an eye on the snakes, but there was a certain relief in having the place to himself. No more asinine genin missions. Just himself and his training. He should have known it was too good to last. As he meditated, he heard a knock on the door. Sasuke frowned, his chakra flaring up with anger at being disturbed. As the door swung open, his eyes flashed, Sharingan at the ready. A shock of red hair and a slim figure, Karin. Sasuke sighed and deactivated his Sharingan. He'd met Karin weeks ago, one of Orochimaru's lackeys that managed a different lair within Oto's borders. When he'd seen her last, she'd been smitten over him, trying to snuggle up close when Orochimaru wasn't looking. Sasuke had never liked fangirls. But Karin had a different look in her eyes as she approached him. She didn't seem smitten at all, only determined. She sat, cross-legged in front of him. I'd been hoping to get a chance to talk to you alone. Too bad Orochimaru hovers around you like a vulture. I'm not interested in flirting, Karin. Sasuke growled. Leave me be. Oh, I'm not either. Karin answered with a wave of her hand. But when everyone thinks you're a lovesick puppy trailing in Orochimaru's footsteps, they're way less likely to suspect you of anything. Sasuke blinked. All right, now things had gotten interesting. So what do you want? I'm trying to gauge where you stand. Karin admitted. If you're one of Orochimaru's perfect little angels or if you're here because you have to be. It's always one or the other, and from what I've heard, I kind of get the feeling it's the latter. You've got a brother that needs killing and Orochimaru is the only one who can train you to do it, am I right? Sasuke didn't answer, but that only brought a grin to Karin's face. Silence spoke as loud as words, it seemed. Oh goody. I was hoping that was the case. Do you remember the Chunin exams, Sasuke? You rescued me after my team had died. When I heard you'd come to Orochimaru, I knew it couldn't have been because you were like him. You're far too nice. Sasuke scoffed. You don't know me very well, then. I'm not saying you're not strong. But you're not a psychopath. You don't get your kicks off of experimenting for him, and you sure as hell don't worship him. Which means, as soon as you've learned everything you can from the old snake, Karin's eyes gleamed. Yours and my interests will align. And what interests are those? Putting the snake in the ground. So she wanted to kill Orochimaru, that didn't surprise him. It seemed like half the people in Oto wouldn't have minded seeing Orochimaru dead. I can get strong enough to kill him on my own. Sasuke argued. Why should I trust anyone else? Because you're not thinking big picture. Karin replied. Orochimaru is just a stepping stone to your brother. But once Orochimaru is dead, how are you going to find your brother? Sasuke frowned. It was true, on that front, he had absolutely no idea. Now, if you helped me kill Orochimaru, and helped set me up at leader of Otogakure, I could arrange search teams to find your brother. Any resource you need, I'd give it. I look after my friends, Sasuke Uchiha, and I wouldn't forget the man who helped me come into power. You need your brother? I'll deliver. A home when your revenge is complete. I'll always have a spot for my friends. At the end of the day, helping me means nothing extra for you and all of the extra benefits. Tempting. Sasuke thought on this. He didn't trust Karin, not completely, but he did trust that she wanted Orochimaru dead. Really, he had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I suppose I could cooperate, as long as you kept your word. Excellent. Karin pushed herself to her feet. Then it is decided. I, Karin Uzumaki, will be the next Otokage. And once I am in charge, I will bring Itaki Uchiha to you. We have a deal. She held out a hand, and Sasuke reached up to take it. For a brief moment, his thoughts wandered. Uzumaki? He'd never heard of anyone but Naruto with that last name, and maybe it was the way she was posturing about becoming a Kage, but something about her suddenly seemed familiar. He chuckled. Uzumaki were all the same, it seemed. Annoying, loud, and stupidly ambitious. And now there were two of them. Deal. He confirmed. So where do we begin? You have 2 years, Uchiha. Milk as much knowledge out of the old snake as you can. When the time comes, we'll have a plan at the ready. Karen started for the door, but hesitated. Then, suddenly, she began to mess up her hair, and unbutton several of the buttons on her jacket. It'll be less suspicious if everyone thinks we're sleeping together, she explained. Though, if you ever really want a good night. She gave Sasuke a wink and a kiss as she headed for the door. As she closed it behind her, Sasuke shuddered. Women were absolutely terrifying sometimes. Chapter 27. It was surreal to see her sensei in such a vulnerable position in front of her. All of Sakura's memories of Kakashi had been of him standing strong against powerful opponents, Sharingan seeing through everything. A dozen shinobi had been needed to take him down, that much was enough to bring her some relief, but that Kakashi could be taken down at all was jarring. Never in her wildest imagination could she have pictured a scenario where Kakashi had been taken down, let alone with her on the other side, safely among her sensei's enemies. But they weren't supposed to be enemies anymore, which was the real problem. Oniki wanted peace and cooperation between villages, and damn it all if Kakashi invading here wasn't just going to ruin all of that. She'd just started to get the IWA villagers to trust her, just started to work on a plan for approaching Konoha and the other villages. Why are you here, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura decided to ask. I'm here for you, my precious student. Kakashi answered instantly. Here I'd thought you'd left Konoha on some desperate quest to find information that would help Naruto and Sasuke, and instead I find you've stolen the Tsunejin hierarchy and defected to Iwagakure. Sakura winced. That isn't dash. She didn't steal me. Gaara stepped in, answering in an angry tone. I chose to follow her. Not how Suna sees it. Kakashi countered. If not for the fact that they're trying to keep it a secret that you're no longer there, they would have sent a war party after you. As it stands, after the Chunin exams, they can't afford to spare the shinobi. They have to play it safe. Rebuild. Of course, it would have been easier if their northern citizens hadn't suddenly decided to rebel and make a new plains village. Sakura winced again. All right, but in my defense, they'd defected before we got there. We just helped take out the guy who wanted to turn little kids into soldiers. Villages have been using children since their founding, Sakura. You've been meddling in foreign affairs without thinking of the consequences. Says the man tied up in an IWA cell. Sakura crossed her arms, and both she and Kakashi maintained eye contact for what seemed like an impossibly long time. Had he really just come here to lecture her? She was doing way better than he was right now, and he hadn't even heard about the neutrality pact she and Oniki had been. I'm glad you're okay, Sakura. Kakashi's gaze suddenly softened, a look Sakura had seen on him only rarely. The Jounin looked a lot smaller that way, small, vulnerable, worried. Sakura's heart sank into her chest. She hadn't realized, hadn't even thought. She'd convinced herself Naruto and Sasuke were the only ones on the team that Kakashi really thought about. I'm glad you didn't get killed on the way in, Kakashi-sensei. She looked around before pulling up a chair, sitting down in front of him. Gaara was ever close, standing right by her side. He seemed wary of Kakashi, and that was probably fair. Even Sakura didn't know how this scenario was going to play out. If they wanted you dead, they would have killed you already. Sakura started to reason out. He was, in the process of working out some propositions that will hopefully lead to some peace between IWA and Konoha, and everywhere else, if things go like we're planning. That's what they told you. That's what they mean. Sakura insisted. I know you told us to look underneath the underneath, sensei, but I've done it a million times and I can't see how IWA would benefit from this any more than every other village would. The Tsuchikage is tired of war, and with the threat Akatsuki poses, wouldn't it be a good thing if we didn't have other squabbles to distract us? It sounds very convincing, Sakura, I'm sure, but you don't know these shinobi like I do. Kakashi argued. The Tsuchikage is a terrifying strategist. He sees a lone little shinobi from Konoha heading this way, and maybe he thinks if he can say the right words, he can get some sort of leg up on Konoha. Information, or maybe something more. Well, it's not like I'd have anything to give him. Sakura snapped. Everything I know about the village I had to investigate on my own. The only reason I even know a thing about Naruto is because I was his teammate. And oh, did you know about Root, Kakashi-sensei? Did you know that Konoha is brainwashing children to be perfect, emotionless soldiers? Kakashi fell silent at that. So he did know. Sakura could see it on his face. And if Kakashi knew, how many other shinobi knew? How many other shinobi knew and did nothing? Maybe the Tsuchikage is using me. She continued with a small shrug. But at least he's teaching me. I've learned more about Earth-style jutsu in the past couple weeks than anything you or the Academy ever taught me. Hell, I learned more about my own capabilities wandering around in the fucking plains than back at Konoha. You would have had me sit on my ass waiting for Naruto to get stronger. I didn't think you were ready. Kakashi protested. Sakura, you've always been. What, emotional? Fragile? Weak. Sakura was fuming now, and she couldn't help but stand, fist clenched. Maybe I wouldn't have been weak if you hadn't only had eyes for the boys. You taught Sasuke the Chidori. Naruto had Jiraiya. I didn't have anyone. And with that, Kakashi was quiet. He let his head hang, and for a moment Sakura felt pity. You're right. He answered. I should have been there for you too. That's why I'm here now, Sakura. I'm here to take you home. And, I'll speak with Tsunade. The two of us will still be Team 7. We'll do missions together, and I'll teach you everything you want to know. Sakura felt Gaara tense next to her, and his hand reached out to touch her own. He was worried. Worried Sakura would be tempted by the offer in front of her. Worried she'd leave him. And Sakura couldn't help but be tempted. Wasn't that what she had wanted all along? For Kakashi to notice her? To be able to stand side by side with the boys, equally strong, teammates? Kakashi was promising to teach her. She could go back to Konoha. And she would leave everything else behind. Sakura realized, then and there, with a strange sort of finality, that she wasn't quite sure Konoha was where she was supposed to be. She reached out to give Gaara's hand a reassuring squeeze before sitting down again, calmer now. I think I might have wanted that once. She admitted. But I've learned a lot since I've left the village, and, well, you can say I've made some friends I didn't expect. Even if I did want to go back to Konoha, I can't abandon Gaara, and if Konoha took him in, that might lead to all-out war with Suna over it. He needs to go home, Sakura. The balance of the villages has been upset without him there. Every major shinobi village has Jinchuriki and now Suna has none, and they know you're the one who ran away with him. It's possible they might turn on Konoha again out of spite. Kakashi explained. And think of what the other villages will think of us. Not one, but two rogue shinobi so quickly after each other? They'll think Konoha is falling apart. You leaving us hasn't just affected me, it's affected everyone. And we're still recovering from the last war that got sent our way. Kakashi took a deep breath. We need shinobi. We need you. And while I'd rather come with you willingly, if I have to take you back by force, I will. Sakura flinched. Kakashi was so determined, almost terrifyingly so, and Sakura knew that if Kakashi were set free, she wouldn't be able to stop him from taking her back. She wasn't strong enough. She didn't want to be strong enough. This was her sensei, and she should have been happy to see him again, but now she was just sour. If you're just here to take me back, Kakashi-sensei, you can forget about it and go home. Sakura finally answered. Konoha didn't give a fuck about me until I left. But the Tsuchikage, he thinks I can be strong. And not only that, He thinks I can help bring peace to the shinobi villages. And if I can make the world a better place, shouldn't I? Sakura stood up again, taking a sharp breath. She wouldn't get mad, she told herself, not now, not now. If I can make a world where Jinhiriki can be accepted, where they don't have to worry about being hunted down by S-class shinobi, shouldn't I? If I can make a world where shinobi don't get driven so mad that they kill their entire clan, shouldn't I? If I can make a world where Naruto and Sasuke can be safe and happy, then I'm going to. And if Konoha isn't going to help me reach that goal, then I'm not going to be a part of Konoha anymore. Not Konoha, not IWA, not any village. I'm just gonna be me, and I'm going to do whatever I can for the people I care about. She was still too emotional, so Sakura turned, not wanting to look Kakashi in the eye any longer. A wise shinobi once told me that those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are even worse than that. Sakura. Sakura headed for the door without another word, Gaara close behind her. She was greeted by Oniki and the others outside, all of whom looked grave. He's just here to take me back. Sakura insisted. He wasn't here for anything else. He might have thought you were holding me prisoner or something, otherwise he wouldn't have tried to sneak in. That's all well and good, but we can't just let him go. The village will think us weak. Kuratsuki explained. We have to keep him prisoner until we can discuss this with Konoha's Hokage. She can't just send shinobi into our borders right now without risking war. I know. Sakura nodded. Let me think of something. I just need time to think. She needed time to breathe. Thankfully, nobody stopped her as she made her way out of the building and into the crisp air. Gaara merely followed, not more than a couple steps behind, and after a moment she heard Sai's soft steps as well. She was angry. And she hadn't expected to be so angry upon seeing her old sensei again, but Sakura had never been terribly good at hiding her emotions, and it seemed as though, after all this time, that hadn't changed. Even as she stomped her way back to their apartment, she fumed and muttered and cursed. I should be happy, she said aloud, pacing back and forth in their living room. Kakashi comes all this way just to bring me back to Konoha, further than anyone ever went for Sasuke. But if he'd just talked to me before I'd left, maybe I wouldn't have needed to leave at all. Nobody gave a damn about me until I left my stupid village. You're right. Sai commented from his spot on a couch. Nobody thought a genin fresh out of the academy worth sparing excess resources for. That's just poor management. Sai, Gaara warned. Should I lie? Sai countered. Say we all loved her so very much when it's clear to her that they didn't? I'm only here because of her connection to the Uchiha, and now to keep an eye on a potential political relation with IWA. Nothing in my mission parameters ever paid much mind to her specifically until she started making herself important. Shinobi are tools to be used as the village sees fit. Konoha doesn't care about her feelings. It doesn't care about whether or not she's happy or safe. All it cares about is keeping the village strong and prosperous. Kakashi was sent to retrieve you because we've experienced a shortage of shinobi since the war, and every person counts. And that's bullshit, Sai. It's complete bullshit. Sakura had clenched her fists again, but she had stopped her pacing. People can't live like this. People can't live just being things. Maybe you believe so. But that's the way things are. There's no point getting upset about things you already know. Sai was right. She should have known. Should have seen it. She wasn't given the time of day because she wasn't strong like Naruto and Sasuke. She hadn't made it to the finals of the Chunin exam. She hadn't been able to protect her village from war beyond pointlessly chasing after Sasuke. She was an average shinobi at best, so why would they waste time cultivating someone who would never excel? Waste time encouraging her when she would never be. I guess I'd just hoped. Sakura admitted. Hoped that Konoha was better than that. It will be. Gaara stepped in front of Sakura, looking her in the eyes. Look at me. He insisted. I used to be what they wanted. A tool. A weapon. A monster. But you did what they wouldn't. You made something human out of me. With you I've felt joy and peace. With you, I felt real. So even if Konoha is troubled now, even if Suna and IWA and the rest of the world need fixing, I know we can fix it. You showed me how. Gaara, I want to start Onaki's neutrality project. Gaara continued. I want to be the bridge between everyone. I want to show them what you and Naruto showed me. That there is a better path. We don't have to live in a world where children are made into monsters. We will make a world of love. Sakura's eyes flickered to the mark on Gaara's forehead, bright red against the boy's pale skin. And then, before she could react, Gaara had reached forward and hugged her. He was warm and solid around her, like a mountain against her shaking body. Sakura was shocked, at first, but couldn't help but wrap her arms around him in turn. Tears finally began to escape her eyes, and she clung tighter as sob after sob left her throat. She didn't know how much time passed before she finally let go, but it had been more than enough. She wiped her eyes and gave Gaara a reassuring smile. I'll be alright. And you're right. That's why I'm here, isn't it? I wanted to help Naruto and Sasuke at first, but then I met you, and all the others. They're all people that deserve happiness too. Even you, Sai. We deserve a peaceful world, but someone has to make it first, no matter what it takes. And it started here, in Uegakure, with Onaki's project, and with keeping Kakashi safe. I have an idea. She realized. An idea that will work out for everyone. About time. Sai answered. I'd thought you were just going to cry here all day. Sakura chuckled. Sai, you can be a real ass sometimes, you know. Putting it lightly. Gaara mumbled. But, thank you, for what you said. You're right. I need to stop romanticizing my village. I need to really see how the world treats its shinobi, otherwise I'll never be able to fix it. Sai watched her for a moment before quickly looking back down to his book. I was just stating the obvious. He insisted. Maybe so. But sometimes people need to hear it. Sai didn't answer as he stood up from the couch, putting away his small notebook. But when they reached the door, he spoke again, this time more softly. I'll be curious to see what this world of love will be like. Oh. Sakura looked back at Sai, intrigued. If it's anything like you and Gaara, then, Sai put a finger to his chin, thoughtfully. I should expect people to be grumpy or crying. Sakura grimaced, but as she looked at Sai, she realized. Was he just teasing them? You're an idiot, Sai. Alright Kakashi-sensei. You've got two options. Sakura stood in front of Kakashi again, arms crossed, attempting to look on charge, professional. If she was going to be heading this project, she needed to work on her in charge face. Alright. Kakashi answered. I have two options. Your first option is that you've come here under Konoha orders to infiltrate IWA and retrieve me from their borders. This option will have you remain in this cell as a prisoner and bring about a possible declaration of war from IWA, as they have proof of Konoha willingly breaking peace treaty agreements. So, the first option is, the reason I'm here. Kakashi deduced, frowning through his mask. Sakura, I don't see dash. Option 2. Sakura interrupted. Is that there was a terrible misunderstanding. Ah. Because you actually came here as an ambassador to Konoha to speak with IWA regarding a new group it is spearheading. A group of neutral shinobi that will act as an in-between for the shinobi villages and help them settle disputes before they can turn bad enough to lead to war. Wait, Sakura, WH-. You know about this project because, being a former Konoha shinobi, I have sent the Hokage a missive detailing the goals of this group and hoped she might be able to send someone to help us iron out a system that will be beneficial for every village, not just Uegakure. Sakura. And Sakura finished. You were sent here because you are my former sensei, someone that I know and trust, and that I'd had a good relationship with in the past. It is my hope that, between the two of us and the Tsuchikage, that we will be able to draft a treaty that will outline the beginnings of an alliance between all of the shinobi villages on the continent. This draft will permanently solidify borders, outline trade routes, and determine clauses for which villages will help each other in times of need. We will hopefully get the leader of the Plains village involved as well, and upon completion of the draft I will take the draft to every village and run it by every leader until terms have been agreed upon and finalized by me. Every village that signs onto the treaty will be privy to its benefits and beholden to its agreements, or else risk war with every other village involved in the signing." Sakura took a deep breath, and then gave Kakashi a sheepish grin. "That's what Oniki and I have been working on anyway. I think it'll go a long way towards helping restore relations between IWA and Konoha if there's a shinobi from each village working on the project to start. Plus, it will set an example for all of the other villages. If IWA and Konoha can put aside their differences, anyone can. Regardless, you're not taking me back, and, well, I'd rather not be forced to try and cool down a spat between IWA and Konoha so early into my career as an ambassador, just because my sensei won't take no for an answer." Kakashi sighed. "Well, you're admittedly putting me in a difficult spot, Sakura." "Difficult to say no, you mean? It implies my student is going to be heading into villages that are otherwise our enemy, on the vain hope that every single one of them won't kill her on sight as a trespassing shinobi, and that somehow each of them will agree to this proposition. At least I'm doing something instead of sitting around waiting for the grass to grow." "That you are." Kakashi leaned back in his chair, letting out an even deeper sigh. "And here I thought you were the least troublesome of my students. I'd thought to myself, there's no way that Sakura could have gotten involved with anything more troubling than Orochimaru. She's just gone for a little road trip to find herself, and I'll have her back in no time. This isn't even the most troubling thing I've done this month," Sakura admitted. "I met up with 2 of Akatsuki on the way here." Kakashi's head flopped forward, eye widened. "You what?" "One of them gave me this necklace." Sakura held up the amulet of Jashin around her neck for Kakashi to see. "He's also might be immortal. Not sure yet. I sent all the information I found to Tsunade, and I've told it all to the Tsuchikage as well. Knowledge about Akatsuki is going to be very valuable to every village with a Jinhiriki, so if I tell them that I'll share everything I know if they listen to my neutrality proposition, they're probably going to want to listen, right?" "Maybe so." Well, it doesn't seem like I have a choice," Kakashi admitted. "Option 2. For now." "Option 2. For now," Sakura agreed. She looked back towards the door. "Gaara, can you ask them to come untie Konoha's ambassador? There's been a big misunderstanding, you see." The table was quiet. On one side, Sakura and Gaara sat close together. Gaara hadn't touched his food, likely because Kakashi hadn't touched his either. Gaara watched Kakashi, and Kakashi watched Sai. Sai, thankfully, was more than happy to dig into his meal, and Sakura was getting increasingly grateful for the fact that the boy wasn't unnerved by anything. "When you mentioned Root, I'd thought it was because you'd fought off the agent that had been sent to investigate you." "Well, that would have been rude," Sakura replied, also more than happy to dig into a meal after an emotionally exhausting day. "After all, I didn't have anything to hide, and if the leader of Root hears about the treaty, it's not like there will be much they can do to stop it from happening." "You're severely underestimating Root." "Sai's my friend," Sakura insisted. "I trust him to speak well of me and help Root understand the importance of this." "That you would trust a member of Root in such a way more than implies that you are definitely not ready to be an ambassador." "It's not Root that I trust. It's Sai. Sai is Root. Sai is Sai. Sai is getting tired of people talking about him like he isn't there." Sai spoke up, his usual fake smile plastered onto his face. "Danzo is more than eager to see how the neutrality project develops, and I am on orders to keep an eye on the progress of the project and see how Sakura brings it together. Such information will be vital to the village, especially if other villages begin to join in on this project." Kakashi's eye narrowed, and he continued to watch Sai. And Gaara continued to watch Kakashi. And Sakura wondered if this was ever going to work. With a groan of annoyance, she stood up and began to make her way outside. She could do with a walk. This was only the latest of conversations that hadn't gone well today. Though Oniki had done his best to appear non-threatening, it was hard when the man clearly held animosity towards Kakashi. No doubt because of the last war. If this was what it was going to be like trying to get all the Kage to communicate with each other, Sakura wasn't sure this project was going to work. The only consolation she had was that the two men hadn't tried to kill each other. She'd known this was going to be hard work, but, seeing things in action. I don't trust him. Gaara commented, as always following close behind her. You think he's going to take me away from you? Sakura corrected. And he won't. Even if he did, I'd find my way back. I'm not sending you back to Suna and I'm not going back to Konoha unless it's to get Tsunade on board with this project, and in that case you'll be coming there with me. I know. But he's strong. And we don't know what he's planning now that he's free. No, we don't. Sakura admitted. But, I wish I did. I used to trust him more than anything. He was my sensei. He'd keep me safe from the world if he had to. And he'd make sure Sasuke never left. She hadn't realized how simple things had been before Kakashi showed up. But she supposed she was going to have to face Konoha one way or another if she was going to be an ambassador. Better now than later, when her village had grown even more bitter to her leaving. Though it was a cold night, it didn't bother Sakura as much anymore. She'd grown used to seeing her breath form white clouds in front of her face, and the hard crunch of the frozen ground beneath her feet. She didn't wince like she used to when she sat upon a cold rock, and her body didn't shiver as the wind blew through her. And that was with only a couple weeks of being here. Stronger, she reminded herself. She was getting stronger. And she just had to show Kakashi that, show him that this was worth it. She didn't have to wait long for her chance. Kakashi had followed her out onto the mountainside. He didn't show any sign of being cold, though whether that was strength of will or actual strength of body, Sakura wasn't sure. Regardless, he still looked small as he approached her. Small and regretful. He sat down on a rock next to her and pulled out one of his books. Sakura frowned. Is now really the best time to be reading your smut, sensei? I want to know how it ends. Kakashi admitted. You've been reading that one since I became a genin. I'm a slow reader. And you're also full of shit. Alright. Kakashi flipped a page. Maybe it's easier to talk to people when I've got a book in my hand. And I'm not quite sure how to talk to you right now. You're not the Sakura I remember. No, Sakura agreed. I'm not. But that doesn't mean we have to. I mean, I know I got mad, but, she huffed. Well, I feel like I had a valid reason to be mad, you know? But you're still my sensei and I can't hate you for what you did. Naruto and Sasuke were assets to the village. A Jinhiriki and the heir to a powerful Kekkei Genkai, one that you share. And then there's me, a civilian-born kunoichi who could barely stand on her own in the Chunin exams. I get it. There wasn't much encouragement to help me succeed when it was clear I'd never be them. That's definitely how the village would see it. Kakashi nodded. And, how I would have seen it. How I probably did see it. But, I should have known better. Every time I put the village before my comrades, it backfires. But even when I try for the people I care about, it backfires too. He turned a page of his book, blushing slightly as he did. Well, maybe I wasn't really meant to be a sensei. I protested it, when the third first put me in the rotation. I didn't want children to look after. I just wanted to do my job, protect the village, do what I was good at doing. But, well, I'm not even really very good at that. I find that hard to believe. Sakura argued. You're one of the strongest shinobi I know. Do you remember that gravestone I showed you, on the day of your bell test? Yes. 2 of those were my comrades that I couldn't protect. My genin squad, when I was first enlisted as a shinobi. Sakura grew quiet. She'd never even thought about Kakashi being on a genin squad. Never thought about him having teammates, partners, even now, she could barely picture it. Obito Uchiha. Kakashi began. Gave his life to protect me from a boulder trap. It was my first mission as a Jounin commander, my last mission with my old team. We were deep into war with IWA, and we'd been tasked with destroying a vital bridge across Akusa River. Destroying it would cut off a supply line for IWA, you see. But, destroying that bridge eventually fell to the 4th Hokage, Minato. My own sensei and team leader. At the time, the other member of my team, Rin Nohara, had been captured by enemy shinobi. She was a medicnin, highly valued for her skill and as a bargaining chip. I had elected to abandon her in favor of the mission. Obito elected to return and save her. Eventually, I came around to the right way of thinking and went to help, but I missed it. The trap. And Obito, in his selflessness, saved me from death, and with his own dying breath gave me his Sharingan. Kakashi pulled up his headband, his eyes wincing slightly as the cold air hit them. As for Rin, in that same war, she was captured again, and forcibly made a jinhuriki of the Sanbai. She chose to throw herself in front of my Chidori rather than be used as a tool against our village. I saw her die on my hand. Sakura looked over, noticing that the book Kakashi was holding was shaking slightly. She hadn't known. How could she have known? Two teammates, lost to war. But then you should understand better than anyone why we should try to stop wars before they happen. I wish the world was that easy, Sakura. Kakashi answered. I wish the Kage would all just sign a treaty and promise not to fight ever again. But even with that treaty, you don't know how things will go. It's all just words and false promises. Shinobi need something bigger than themselves to unite them, something bigger than the villages and the Kage. I'm not sure anything's that big. Kakashi's hand slowly steadied, and he turned another page of his book. At least, that's what I might have thought. Might have. Sakura, what I'm about to tell you is something that will never leave this mountainside. Kakashi's tone had shifted, and suddenly he wasn't looking at his book at all, but at her. Sakura couldn't help but nod. She looked back at Gaara briefly. He can hear this too, if you trust him. Kakashi continued. Discussing the death of the fourth Hokage is strictly forbidden within the village. But you are no longer declaring yourself part of the village, and if you are going to dive into this, you need to know. Need to know what, sensei? My theory. My theory that Naruto's birth was sabotaged so that the Kyuubi could break free and destroy Konoha. My theory that the fourth didn't die just because of the Kyuubi's power, but that there was someone there, behind the scenes, manipulating everything. Sakura froze. The implication of that. Orochimaru? She asked tentatively. I'm not sure. Kakashi admitted. But there was no reason that the Kyuubi should have broken free. We took every precaution. There were umbu everywhere, skilled midwives to help with the birth, and Minato himself was there to ensure the seal on Kushina Uzumaki did not break. The only thing that makes sense was that someone else was involved, and helped ensure that the seal did break. Kakashi closed his book, looking out, instead, over a Wagakuer in front of them. My belief, and the belief of Lord Jiraiya, is that someone from Akatsuki might have been involved. Akatsuki. Sakura nodded. They use the Kyuubi to destroy Konoha, and then take the Kyuubi for themselves. But it backfired, because the fourth managed to seal the fox inside of Naruto. At the cost of his life. Kakashi nodded. But if they were willing to attack Konoha so directly, they could attack any other village. Itaki already infiltrated Konoha to try and kidnap Naruto. What if they try something here? Or with Gaara? Or Sakura hesitated. Wait, this is what you were talking about. Something bigger than village squabbles. Something that could unite shinobi. Akatsuki is the bigger threat. Exactly. Sakura looked over to her sensei, confused. But, does that mean you support what I'm trying to do? Why are you trying to help me? Sakura, Kakashi shook his head. Don't you get it by now? You're my precious student. Even if I don't agree, I can't be selfish. A peace treaty, even if it's just between Iwa and Konoha, could be groundbreaking for our village. And if it's what you feel you need to do, then as your sensei, I need to support you. A sensei is supposed to raise their students up, not bring them down. Something I should have known when I first was assigned to Team 7. Something I don't plan on forgetting. Sakura could have cried right then and there, but instead she found herself running to Kakashi's side, throwing her arms around him. Thank you, sensei. Thank you, thank you. Kakashi seemed embarrassed, unsure of how to react to Sakura's sudden presence. He gently patted her head. Well, you're not out of the woods yet. I need to make sure you're really ready to be out here on your own. As your sensei, if I allowed you to go into this unprepared. So, what? Sakura let go of Kakashi with a frown. You gonna make me try and steal some bells from you again? Actually, Kakashi's eyes indicated a smirk. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Wait, what? Morning hit, and Sakura and Gaara faced Kakashi in the middle of a large IWA training ground. In the distance, Sakura could barely see Oniki and Kuratsuki, as well as two older men that Gaara had introduced to her as Han and Rashi, the IWA Jinhiriki. An audience. Great. Kakashi had set a small timer on top of a log, and placed two bells upon his hip. Frighteningly nostalgic. I heard from the leader of the Plains village that you took on someone who could use magnet release. He called out to Sakura. I also heard you've been studying Earth Jutsu under the third Tsuchikage himself. Couple that with your new Jinhiriki partner, it shouldn't be any trouble for you to get these bells, right? Right. Sakura answered, absolutely not certain she'd be able to. The last time she'd faced Kakashi, he'd caught her in a genjutsu and she hadn't even managed to come close. But she wasn't that kunoichi anymore. And she had Gaara with her. You have until noon. Kakashi told them. And if you don't come at me with the intent to kill, you'll never get the bells. If you can get them, I'll concede that you're ready to start spearhead the neutrality project. If not, then I will tell Lady Tsunade that she should push for a different ambassador. Ugh, that was even worse. But she couldn't let this set her back. She'd come so far. She'd learned so much. And son of a bitch, she was going to get those bells even if it meant she had to take the beating of her life to do it. She was slightly shocked to see Kakashi raise his headband up, revealing his Sharingan eye. And this time, you don't get easy mode. Kakashi warned. You're out in the real world now, and the real world won't hold back. All right. Sakura agreed. Just tell me when you're ready. Begin. Sakura and Gaara moved simultaneously. They'd had time to plan, at least, and Sakura had spent a good portion of the evening before going over strategy and ways to approach Kakashi. Don't look him in the eye unless you wanted your techniques copied. This applied more to her. She doubted Kakashi could ever manipulate sand like Gaara did. Move fast and be unpredictable. Above all else, aim to get close. Aim to get the bells. Both of them slammed their hands down to the ground at the same time. At once, two things happened. Sand rushed forward from Gaara's gourd, rushing towards Kakashi's feet. He would have to jump away, Sakura had theorized, and it was harder to dodge when you were in the air. As Kakashi jumped, Sakura formed a pillar from the earth beneath him. In Septi's all soil, ice as well as earth, she had to put an extra chakra to push the earth as well as the ice surrounding it. It shot up, about a foot shorter than she intended, but still high enough to slam into Kakashi's body. The body disappeared with a puff of smoke. A substitution. Right. She'd expected that. With a smile, Sakura formed her hand signs and sent out a sensing pulse. Kakashi's chakra signature was approximately 5 feet below the earth. Bad idea, she thought to herself. But the signature was moving closer, she realized. Kakashi intended to attack them from below, perhaps burying her in the earth much like he had done with Sasuke during the first bell test. Below us. She called out to Gaara. Without another word, Gaara summoned a layer of sand beneath them, lifting them into the air. They moved up just in time to see Kakashi burst out from the ground beneath them. Double bad idea. Now he was close. Knowing Gaara would cover her, Sakura leapt down from the sand raft, aiming to reach for the bells while Kakashi was distracted. The Jounin twisted away just in time, but not before Sakura felt the cool touch of metal beneath her fingers. Damn. She'd been close. But also, damn. She'd been close. That was as far as Sasuke got. Kakashi admitted as he hopped away from her. But that's still not close enough. We're just getting started. Sakura grinned. Her grin only lasted for another half an hour. From there, it was frowning, and then frustration. Kakashi was fast. His Sharingan could see her moves before they happened. Even with Gaara's sand able to reach far distances and cover most of the ground, Kakashi managed to dance and jump just out of reach, bells ever present at his side. By the time there was an hour left on the timer, Sakura had touched the bells 5 times and Gaara had touched them twice. Her only consolation was that Kakashi was looking tired too. But she'd used up almost all of her chakra on this fight, and unless she wanted to drain herself completely, she was down to nothing but her fists and her wits. "I'll admit. You've gotten much stronger," Kakashi commented to them. "I'm not questioning anymore how you managed to take that magnet release shinobi down. Then just give up and let me have the bells," Sakura retorted. "Then we can get some lunch and you can go back to your smut." "Not a chance." Kakashi shook his head. "I told you, you had to prove yourself. An ambassador needs to be able to think quickly, adapt to any situation, and be able to defend herself from potential assassins. If you can't do this simple task, we can do it," Sakura insisted. "I just need 5 seconds to catch my breath." "Maybe you're the one that should be thinking about giving up, if you need to take a break." "Never," Sakura insisted. "I'm not giving up, Kakashi. I'll show you everything I've accomplished since I left Konoha, and I'm going to get those damn bells. You won't be able to stop me." Big words, but Sakura wasn't sure she could follow up. He'd managed to dodge every single one of our techniques. The only thing she could do was catch him so completely off guard that he wouldn't even have a chance to react. Something that no one in their right mind would suspect. She straightened herself up, ready to try once again, when all at once something flew at Kakashi from behind. A small, black and white bird snatched the 2 bells from Kakashi's waist. It soared over to Sakura and landed on her shoulder. As she reached up, confused, it dropped the bells into her hand. Traditionally, the bell test is done with 1 Jounin leader facing off against 3 students. Sai's voice sounded as he landed next to her. "You couldn't hope to win if it was 2 against 1. But since you tired him out and kept him distracted, that let me finish the job. 3 against 1, as intended." He turned to Sakura, smile at the ready. "And now I don't owe you any more for saving my life." Then, so subtly Sakura almost missed it, his smile softened. It looked genuine. "Sai, you beautiful bastard." Sakura threw an arm around the shinobi's shoulders, pulling him into a tight hug. "We did it, Kakashi. We got your stupid bells." "I think that's technically cheating," Kakashi protested. "You never said I couldn't call for help. And isn't it an ambassador's job to make friends?" Sakura laughed, pulling Gaara into the hug as well. "Now you have to accept us as ambassadors and support the project." "You promised." "Us?" Sai asked. "I'm still part of Konoha, you know. You helped get the bells. You're stuck with us now, Sai, you can't deny it anymore. We're friends and you know it." This time, Sai didn't protest. And something about this, the 3 of them, enjoying a victory together, something about it felt right. Chapter 28, Act 1 Epilogue. My sources in Sunagakure have informed me that the Ichibai Jinhuriki has gone rogue. The last time he was seen was over a month ago. So first we lose the Kyuubi, now the Ichibai? Next you're going to tell me the 3 tails just up and wandered out of the dem pool you left it in. Quiet, Haiden. You be quiet, motherfucker. If I see the Ichibai, I'll drag him here myself. I'm tired of playing the waiting game. When are we going to get to kill some people? Patience. Our funding is almost in place. Once we have our containment built, we will proceed with the capture of the Jinhuriki, and you may kill whomever you'd like to get to them. And just how long will this construction take, HN? How many more odd jobs do we need to take before we're ready to move forward? If our current rate holds, we will be ready in 2 years. Until then, continue with your duties, and track down our missing Jinhuriki. We cannot fail in our mission. Go forth, and do not allow yourself to be distracted from our goals." The hologram faded, and young woman with hair as blue as the sky looked up forlornly at the falling rain. "Nagato," she whispered to herself. "Is this really what he would have wanted?" Chapter 29, Act 2 Prologue. Act 2, Roots. Dear Mom and Dad. I guess, first and foremost, I want you to know that I'm okay. I don't expect you to understand why I had to leave. I've kept a lot of my shinobi life from you in the past, some of it because I had to, but some of it because I wasn't sure you'd want to know what it meant for your daughter to be a shinobi. The world is a dangerous place. Our people have been at war since before the founding of our villages. Since I've left home, I've come to see that unless someone acts, this trend of death and destruction will not cease. I know it may be hard to believe, but where I am right now, I'm working to make things a better place for everybody. If all goes well, I'll be helping forge a peace treaty that might prevent war from ever happening again. It might seem optimistic, but I have to hold out hope that one day nobody I care for will ever have to be caught up in violence ever again. I'm doing this for you, for Konoha, for everyone. I miss you both, and I hope you're well. If everything goes as planned, I'll be visiting Konoha sometime in the future, and I can explain everything further then. Until then. Love you. Sakura. Ino. I know you probably have a lot of questions for me. And maybe a lot of yelling. But I promise, I have an explanation for everything. What I'm working on is sensitive, but I'm hoping it will set the foundation for an era of peace in the shinobi world. Maybe that's a little heavy. I promise I'll explain everything more when I get to Konoha, which should be soon. More importantly, I wanted to let you know that I'm okay. I'd been thinking about you, recently. More specifically, I was thinking about when we were little. I still have that ribbon you gave me to hold up my hair. I've been using it, since I left my forehead protector behind. It's funny, thinking about how I used to be back then. I was so shy and timid, but since I've left I've been to 3 different countries, and I've even been training under the Tsuchikage. I've been learning some awesome jutsu that'll even show up your mind transfer. I'll show you when I get to Konoha. I've got so many amazing things to tell you about. I heard Naruto's been spending time with your team from Kakashi-sensei. I know he can be a bit much at times, but he's strong and reliable. He'll also eat nothing but ramen if you let him, so make sure he eats something healthy every now and then. And if he gets distracted or unruly, you can motivate him by telling him that whatever you're doing will help him get stronger. I miss you. And I promise, I'll see you soon. Sakura. Lee. I know this might seem out of the blue, but ever since I've left the village, I've wanted to talk with you. I don't know what the village has said about me or why I've left, but all you need to know is that I had to leave, in order to get stronger. One day, I hope I'll be strong enough to keep the people I love safe. I figured you of all people would be able to understand that. I will come back to Konoha soon, but for now, just know that I'm training to be a better shinobi. I actually wanted to thank you. I've been keeping up the training routine you taught me ever since I left. It was really difficult at first, but every day I could feel myself getting stronger. And now, I've got a new routine that I've been working on, and I bet it'll even blow you away. Next time I'm in Konoha, I'll show you what I've been up to, and maybe we can even spar together. You're in my thoughts, Lee. Sakura. Naruto. There's a lot I need to tell you, about why I left. I know it must have hurt you, especially so soon after. I heard you went back to Konoha. I think that's for the best. How can you hope to become the best Hokage if you leave and the village forgets about you? I know you can still train while you're there, and if you keep doing missions, you'll be a Jounin by the time I'm back. And I will come back, I promise. And when I do, I'll be stronger too. We'll be able to take down Orochimaru together and make sure Sasuke's safe, and if what I've been working on comes to fruition, we'll be able to take down Akatsuki too. I know I'm being vague right now, but I'm not sure who might get a hold of this, and I'm not sure who we can trust. Naruto, Kakashi told me you've been apprenticing with Lady Tsunade. That's really great. But promise me, if you see a man named Danzo, promise me you'll keep your guard up. He's worked for the village for a really long time, but that doesn't mean he can be trusted. Stay safe, Naruto. I'm always thinking of you. When I get back to Konoha, I'll tell you everything I've been up to, and we'll fix everything together. Sakura. Sasuke. I don't know if this will even reach you. But if it does, I just want you to know. I think I understand now why you had to leave the village. In the past few months, I've learned so much about how the world is, and it's not great. Of course, you already know that. You've lived through the worst possible tragedy this world has to offer. I understand why you think that Orochimaru is the only one that will help you get strong enough to defeat Itachi. I understand why you couldn't accept Konoha as your home. I understand, but, in some things, I think, you were wrong. But words aren't going to show you that, are they? I'm getting stronger, Sasuke. And I'm getting stronger because of my bonds, not in spite of them. I'm going to find you, Sasuke. And I'm going to show you. Sakura. Chapter 30. Dark eyes scanned through the branches of thick conifers, coming to rest on a single flash of color amongst the green. The bird had yet to notice his presence. It let out a series of high-pitched chirps, puffing out the red feathers on its chest as it did so. It bounced back and forth from branch to branch, across from a similar-looking bird with far more modest colors. He dipped his brush into the dark ink and let his brush fly across the page. In a series of several connected strokes, he had an outline, and from there some carefully placed detail work began to bring the bird to life. Birds, he could do. It was almost like second nature, and even though these birds weren't native to Konoha, birds were genuinely built the same. Similar body types, similar pattern of how feathers lay across the animal, this little bird was easy to recreate. Effortless. Even with such a strange pose, he'd captured the detail perfectly. Sai frowned. He glanced downwards towards the forest floor. In the distance, a small mountain river flowed, a quiet babble against the wind and the bird call that otherwise dominated. A shadow could be seen in the river, and after a moment a mess of pink hair burst forth from the water, taking in a gasping breath. The water was likely ice cold, but it didn't seem to faze the kunoichi. She swam in this river every day, starting at the base of the mountain at the crack of dawn and swimming as far as her body could take her. Up here, the river continued for about another 100 feet before reaching a series of caverns. Rainwater pooled from the mountain's peak and flowed into the river from its heights. Without going into the cavern, it was the furthest one could swim up the river. By Sai's calculation, Sakura had swam more than a mile. She shook her head, sending cold water through the air as she continued to take gasping breaths. She would need a moment to catch her breath before coming to shore. Sai stuck his brush into the ink, a look of genuine frustration on his face as he quickly began to paint. Human forms were simple. He could do the outline of a head, of a body, of clothes, simple. He could, at this point, draw the curves of Sakura's building muscles in his sleep. If one looked through his notebook, they would find dozens upon dozens of his trials, from the very first week of his being in IWA to now, months later. Sakura could have passed for a different person at this point. When she'd arrived here, she'd looked the part of a timid girl. Now, bursting forth from the river, she looked more the part of a warrior. Sai watched as a smile of relief passed over Sakura's face, and that was it, that was the part he just couldn't get, no matter how many times he tried. Sai gritted his teeth as he put the tip of his brush to the paper. Why, after all this time, why couldn't he get a simple facial expression right? He was supposed to be a gatherer of information. When he had been sent out from Konoha, Danzo had entrusted him to gather information about Sakura Harano, about the Jinhuriki Gaara, about Iwagakure, about anything he could get his hands on, but if he couldn't reproduce the face of one girl, what did that mean about him? If he could sketch a bird, but not the object of his investigation, could he really be considered a proper investigator at all? But in an even stranger fashion, Sai liked not being able to get her face just right. He liked it, because whenever he couldn't get it right, he felt an angry heat in his chest, a tightness in his facial expression. Frustration. Anger. Sai hadn't remembered feeling anger since he was a child. So as much as the feeling irritated him, Sai had begun to crave it. So he continued to grit his teeth and he continued to put his brush to the page. He could see the expression in his mind, picture it, so why couldn't he put it to the page? There was a flicker of movement below, and in a flurry of sand and earth, the Jinhuriki appeared at the water's edge, brown coat billowing out beneath him. He clicked a small object in his hand and spoke aloud. 24 minutes and 18 seconds. Damn. Sakura cursed, splashing angrily at the water. 5 seconds short of Lee's record. And he's wearing weights. He's also not swimming at altitude. Gaara pointed out. Konoha rivers are more flat, He wouldn't take that as an excuse, and neither should I. Sai watched a smile come to Gaara's face as he reached a hand out to help Sakura out of the water. When he'd first met the Jinhuriki, he'd barely seen the boy make any expressions at all. Now, after all this time, smiling seemed to come to him as easy as breathing. Out of habit, Sai forced himself to smile, attempting to mimic Gaara's own. If he didn't practice, how could he appear believable? As Sakura knelt in the grass on the riverside, still panting from her swim, Gaara began to lay out a towel and dry clothes. The typical routine. Sai attempted once more to sketch the look on Sakura's face, the look of bold determination, frustration at not reaching the record, exhaustion, relief at Gaara's aid, so many emotions flickering across her face so rapidly. The frustration returned, and this time Sai closed his book and stashed away his brush. Not this time. He wouldn't be able to get it this time. But he wouldn't stop trying until he did. He wouldn't stop trying until he could replicate what it was about Sakura Haruno's emotions that drew him to want to break his own training and feel again. Sai. Get down here, you lazy ass. That was his cue. Sai pushed himself off of his perch, landing on the ground below with the silence and grace of a true root agent. By then, Sakura had already pulled on her clothes and begun to walk his way. So, have you changed your mind? Sai blinked. Changed his mind? Ah, that was right. IWA was holding a summer festival that evening. They'd been told that there would be performances, games, food, and all sorts of civilian activities that Sai had never participated in before. He hadn't needed to. Shinobi didn't get vacations. The defense and upkeep of the village was a constant duty. That Shinobi took such time at all was illogical, and the only reason that Sai had thought about such a thing was because Sakura hadn't stopped badgering him about it since she'd heard of it a week ago. No, he answered simply. I see no point in attending such an event. I will have reports to write for my superior before we leave IWA tomorrow. Boring. Sakura frowned, reaching out to poke at his chest. You could write a report about, I don't know, cultural practices in IWA? Use it as an excuse to spy on all the shinobi that will be there? Or maybe even just spend some time with us. Sai couldn't meet Sakura's eyes with that. Even after all this time, weeks, months, Sakura was still insisting that they were friends. He glanced downwards towards the book in his hands. In his mind he saw every drawing, every line he'd put to paper, every one of them of Sakura. He'd drawn 100 expressions, but this one, the one she was giving him now, there was some sort of genuine plea in her eyes, and Sai still couldn't understand why she wanted him along. But perhaps even more frustrating than that was the feeling Sai got in his chest whenever Sakura dragged him along on some training mission or evening activity or insisted that he join her in attending this festival affair. A feeling that just wouldn't leave. A feeling that almost felt pleasant. All right. He finally said. I suppose it would be beneficial to write some reports on cultural practices in IWA. Yes. Sakura pumped a fist into the air. Now all we have to do is convince Kakashi. Come on, Gaara, he's probably reading that dumb book on a roof somewhere. I promised to meet with Han and Rashi one last time before we left. Oh, right. I'll meet you for lunch, then. Sai watched as the two began to make their way back down the mountain towards the village. Gaara still had a smile as Sakura chatted, and Sakura was her usual cheerful self. And Sai felt something after all this. A sinking sensation in his stomach, a tightness in his chest. Guilt, he realized. Guilt for letting himself be swayed by such indulgences. Guilt for getting distracted over a target. Guilt for feeling. He heard a small rustle, and felt a presence appear next to him. Sai immediately pocketed his book. Hello, Hatake. Sai. The man known as Kakashi Hatake was, at times, as much of an enigma as Sakura, but he was a predictable enigma. Here was a man who had served in Umbu's general force, and even under Danzo en route for a time. Kakashi had earned a reputation for being someone willing to put the safety of the village above the lives of even his own teammates. Him being sent here to retrieve a genin who had once served under him was logical. Him being ordered to stay here in IWA by the Hokage so that he could ensure the neutrality agreement being written would be favorable to Konoha was also logical. But what Sai couldn't explain was why Kakashi had taken it up to follow him everywhere. They were both supposed to be working for the benefit of Konoha, and even if Kakashi was no longer a part of Root, surely he understood that, as a Root agent, Sai was helping ensure Konoha's survival? But Kakashi, at first, had seemed nothing but suspicious of Sai's behavior. The Jounin, when he wasn't working with Sakura, had spent every waking hour trailing Sai wherever he went. 2 entire weeks passed with Kakashi on his tail, to the point where Sai had even felt nervous sending his regular reports. But then, out of nowhere, something shifted. Suddenly, Kakashi had stopped trailing him from afar and instead had started to spend time closer. Sai would be writing down information and suddenly he'd notice Kakashi on a branch nearby, reading that strange book of his. Sai would be watching Sakura train from a rooftop and Kakashi would land next to him, reading that strange book of his. And the worst part about it was, whenever the two of them were alone, sometimes Kakashi would talk. At first, it was simple discussion about the current status of Root. Sai found himself initially suspicious of this, but Kakashi was a former Root member, and thus one of the only people he could talk about Root-related topics with. Sai still held his tongue, for the most part. He knew enough to know that the Hokage and Danzo didn't always agree, and it was possible Kakashi had been asked to find information en route for the Hokage to use against Danzo. But eventually, the conversations began to shift. It was no longer questions about Root, but soon questions about Konoha, about the state of the village, about what he thought of Konoha. Sai had never had the privilege of being allowed an opinion before. It didn't matter what he thought of the village, all that mattered was doing his job. Sai allowed himself to give curt responses. Generic ones. Answers that couldn't be used against him or Root. And then, the worst part came. Eventually Kakashi started asking him about himself. The thing that Kakashi seemed to fail to understand was that there wasn't anything to talk about when it came to himself. Sai had no past, no future but that of the village. He didn't have likes or dislikes, he didn't have dreams or ambitions, and he didn't have hobbies. And even if he did feel something when it came to Sakura Haruno, he wasn't so stupid as to admit it in front of anyone. Sakura is looking for you. I know. Kakashi commented, his eye glancing over a page of his book as he talked. But I wanted to talk to you. Has Danzo decided what your next assignment will be when you leave IWA? I will be following Sakura Haruno until she returns to Konoha. From there, I will take my next assignment. I see. Kakashi answered. You know, despite my warnings, my precious student seems rather fond of you. Yes, I've noticed that oddity. And if I had to warrant a guess about you, I'd say, perhaps deep down, you might have gained a little fondness for her over the past few months. Sai frowned. This again. Sakura is merely a target. I feel nothing for her, as is proper. I just have to make sure, you know. Danzo might get worried that his agent is beginning to feel compromised. Sai did his best to maintain the facade of an emotionless exterior. But he had to admit, Kakashi made it extremely difficult. I maintain that, as a proper Root agent, I feel nothing. How very interesting. Kakashi chuckled. I just wanted to see what you had to say on the matter. But more importantly, when are you going to tell Sakura? That I feel nothing. Sai was baffled by the suggestion. I believe she would punch me. No, not that. Kakashi countered. His book lowered, and the man looked up to meet Sai's gaze. When are you going to tell Sakura that Danzo ordered you to return to Konoha a month ago? Sai froze. How had he found out? He'd been certain that, at the very least, Danzo would have taken Sai's past month of silence as a sign that Sai couldn't return home without compromising something. The mission, his position, information, something. He'd assumed, even if Danzo had taken his month of silence as insubordination, perhaps correctly so, that Danzo would have kept this information private and within the ranks of Root. Sai had assumed Root agents would have been sent to question him. So how had Kakashi learned the truth? Years of Root training was the only reason that Sai managed to keep a straight face. He forced himself to smile, the only way he knew to keep the situation from going sour. Foolish of you to assume that everything you hear is correct, hey take. You know as well as anyone that Root is masterful at planting false information. So Root wanted the Hokage and I to believe that you were refusing to return home, is that what you're suggesting? Kakashi went back to his book, chuckling again. Not exactly certain why Danzo would want us to believe that, if not to see if I could find you and bring you home. If you really were planting that sort of information, wouldn't it be detrimental to your mission? Sai's smile faltered. Kakashi's logic was sound. And he absolutely could not let Kakashi know it. As I said, Root is masterful at planting false information. If you fully understood Danzo's plans, he would not be very good at his job, would he? Ah, of course. Sai turned to leave, not wanting to meet Kakashi's eyes any further. The man knew too much. The man knew. Even if Sai could try to argue his way around it, eventually the truth would come out. In the months since he'd followed Sakura Haruno to IWA, Sai had become compromised. And he had no idea what he was going to do. As Gaara caught sight of the small hut at the top of the hill, he braced himself. His sand would automatically protect him, but Gaara had learned in his months of training that against a certain someone, it wasn't necessarily enough. Lee had been the first to be fast enough to break through his sand, but Roshi, on the other hand. He felt the force of the Yonbai suddenly slam against his own as Roshi approached, a hurricane of power that his sand could only barely keep up with. Gaara decided, this time, to take a strategic approach. With a flare of chakra, he performed a substitution, leaving a sand clone in his place for Roshi to demolish. That would give him approximately 3 seconds to get closer to his goal. Roshi believed that a shinobi should be prepared for anything. He believed that a Jinchuriki, more so than anyone else, should be prepared for the worst. And when Roshi had finally decided to help Han in training Gaara, Roshi had implemented one single schedule to the program. A training he liked to call, Danger Can Strike at Any Time and You'd Better Be Prepared. The original name had a lot more cursing. Gaara had simplified it down in his mind to remember it better. The training usually took place as Gaara made his way up to their home. Today, Han had invited Gaara over for one final breakfast before he and Sakura left IWA. Of course, that meant one final time that Roshi would try to break his defenses. If he made it to the hut, he passed the training. If Roshi managed to land a single hit, then he failed the training. Gaara was used to playing an ultimate defender, but speed had never been his forte. At least, it hadn't been. Gaara concentrated, reaching out with his mind until he connected with Shukaku. There were no words spoken, but there was an understanding. Gaara needed to pass the training. And Shukaku was too prideful to lose to that horrid monkey. Shukaku's spite, it seemed, was a powerful motivator for their symbiosis. Gaara felt Shukaku's energy begin to spiral within him. It was a warm sort of power, and he could manipulate it now as easily as breathing. He sent the power pushing towards his legs, and he pushed off the ground towards the door of the hut. The scenery seemed to fly by him, and Gaara reached for the doorknob. If he could just touch it. Roshi appeared in front of him, and it took every bit of Gaara's reflexes to dodge the punch that was thrown his way. His sand, unfortunately, wasn't quite fast enough to keep up with his enhanced speed yet. It would be several seconds before the sand caught up, and that meant that he would have to rely on his own dodging ability until then. He saw Roshi's hands flicker with movement, and paled slightly. Roshi was really going all out today. The man's cheeks puffed up, and a flurry of molten rocks spewed forth from his mouth. Lava release, Gaara had learned, which was the specialty of the Jinchuriki of the Yonbai. If even one of the rocks hit him, it would melt through his sand armor and, well, that would be the end of that. Gaara pushed himself backwards, skidding along the ground. He wasn't fast enough to dodge, but he was powerful enough to move more earth than just his sand. He slammed his hands to the ground, summoning up the earth beneath him into a thick wall, just in time to provide himself with cover against Roshi's rocks. The wall crumbled slightly, but it held. His sand caught up, and that gave him an immediate edge. As Roshi appeared behind him for yet another attack, his sand was able to provide cover. Gaara pushed more chakra to his legs and leaped over the wall he'd made, once again heading for the door. But this was a diversion. He had to play it smart. As he made it to the top of his wall, Gaara created another sand clone with a substitution jutsu. As predicted, Rashi was fast enough to catch up with his clone immediately, shattering it to dust with a single blow of his fist. But it was just a clone, and Gaara had just the right amount of time he needed to reach the doorknob. He grabbed hold of it and pulled the door open, moving out of the way just in time as Rashi went flying into the hut. Gaara winced as he heard Rashi slam into one of the cabinets inside. It happened frequently, but it still made him cringe every time. Taking a deep breath, he walked into the cabin, going to offer a hand to the grumbling Jinhiriki. "Damn those clones of yours," Rashi complained, though he took Gaara's hand regardless. "But I suppose you're starting to get a brain in that head of yours. I can't even tell the difference between your clones and your real body anymore. It probably helps having such a diligent teacher." Han's voice echoed out from the kitchen. "I'm not sure if diligent is the word I would use," Gaara countered, by now used to the banter that tended to fill the hut. "Ah, true. Most people would call Rashi insane." "Han, you bastard, just give me a damn muffin." Rashi stomped into the kitchen, opening the oven and reaching directly into it, despite the protests from the other man. It had startled Gaara at first, seeing how casual Rashi was about reaching into fires and ovens and other things that would burn most people, but Shukaku had assured him that the day the Yonbai couldn't handle a bit of fire was the day the world would freeze over. Gaara allowed himself to settle at the small table, giving Han a smile as a plate of fried eggs and bacon was deposited in front of him. It would be lying if he said he didn't enjoy mornings like these, though he would have preferred Sakura to be here as well, but there was something about the simple, domestic attitude of the IWA Jinhiriki that made him hopeful for the future. If the two of them could live here together, peacefully, then that meant that he could have a peaceful future of his own to look forward to. Once everything was said and done, once Akatsuki was defeated and the neutrality project was in full swing. Gaara blushed slightly as he considered a small house of his own, hot breakfast on the table. Sakura smiling at him from the other side. "You'll be writing to us, I hope." Han spoke up, sitting down in his chair with a small rumble. "I'm curious to hear how the other Jinhiriki are faring. If they're not doing well." "No, Han, no more house guests," Rashi argued. "It's bad enough having to watch your back every time we're out. No strays. Send them our way." Han continued anyway. "You know we love company." The breakfast was as calm as it could be with the couple's light banter, and as he ate Gaara let his mind wander to the festival he'd be attending tonight. There had occasionally been festivals in Suna, but he'd never felt any desire to go, back when he'd lived there. Even now, the concept of large crowds was a bit intimidating, but Sakura had been so excited to go that he couldn't help but want to go too. "You need to wear something nice for the festival," Han told him as they ate. "Something a bit more formal than your shinobi wear. Do you have a yukata?" No, Gaara admitted. He'd picked up clothes during his time at IWA, but never anything formal. He looked up just in time to see Han shooting a glance towards Rashi, who turned red and looked away. "He's not having one of mine. Rashi will let you borrow one." Han turned to Gaara with a smile. "It'll be a better experience if you can blend in with the crowd, I think. Plus, you might catch Sakura's eye if you dress up nice." Gaara blushed again. He wasn't used to feeling so flustered at the thought of anyone. But despite Shukaku's retching noises in the back of his mind, it wasn't, Gaara realized, an unpleasant feeling. In fact, he was beginning to savor it. There was 1 hour before the festival began, and it still wasn't enough time. She'd managed to convince Kakashi to go, which had been step 1 of the day. Step 2 had been ensuring that she had the proper yukata for a festival. Sakura wasn't sure she'd have a chance to glamour up in the future, and if she missed the opportunity now she knew she'd regret it. She'd found a dark red one with pretty pink cherry blossoms sewn into the fabric, and perhaps it was a bit heavy-handed given her name, but she'd liked it and damn it all, it looked good on her. Step 3 was the more difficult one. It had been a step 3 for days now, weeks even, whenever she'd had free time after a day of training or drafting the neutrality agreement. Step 3 involved a library. It was funny that she so often ended up in libraries. It had been a library that had started her journey away from Konoha, that had started all of this, and here she was, yet again, hitting the books. These were books she'd read before, a million times, but she kept scanning over them in case there was some hint, some sort of clue that she'd missed when reading them before. Looking up Madara Uchiha again, Sakura looked up as Onaki's voice echoed in the small study room. She gave the old man a sheepish smile. You caught me, Onaki-sensei. I know you've told me everything you remember, but between that and the records you have, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like everything's here. Talk me through it. Onaki sat across from her, his back cracking as he did so. Sakura winced, though in truth she'd gotten used to it. All right. She agreed. Talking through it, it was. So, I think I have everything about Madara during his prime. It's really his death that doesn't seem to add up. And why, pray tell, is my student interested in the death of Madara Uchiha? I'll get there in a minute. Sakura promised. Let's start with the Valley of the End and the battle between Madara and Hashirama Senju. Sakura pulled out a notebook, using her notes for a reference. It's generally agreed that Madara, believing that Konoha would never be a place of peace for shinobi, abandoned the village and left for some time. When he returned, he did so intending to destroy the village, and he intended to do so using the nine-tailed fox. The Kyuubi. Sakura pointed at her notes. That right there is important. Madara didn't have the Kyuubi sealed inside of him. He wasn't a Jinchuriki. The history says that Madara was able to control the Kyuubi using his Sharingan. If this was possible for all Sharingan users, then why haven't we seen anyone do it since? I believe I can answer that. Onaki offered. Madara's strength far surpassed that of his clan. It was well known that his Sharingan was different from that of normal Sharingan. There's even rumors that he took his dying brother's eyes in order to strengthen his own. I remember you mentioned that. Sakura nodded. And that rumor specifically is really interesting. It could just be a tall tale, but, Kakashi-sensei has a transplanted Sharingan, we know eye transplants are possible. If the rumor has any truth to it at all, then it's an important detail. We could call it a Sharingan upgrade, and if it exists, we can assume it has the power to control a tailed beast. So, we keep that in mind. She flipped through her notes again, coming to rest on a new page. So, Madara brings the Kyuubi and attempts to destroy the village. Hashirama moves to defend the village. They fight. They fight, and it's such a terrible fight that it levels mountains and landscapes to create the Valley of the End as we know it now. And in the end, Hashirama wins and Madara is defeated. No, not just defeated. Madara is killed. Sakura tapped her pen on her notebook, thinking. From there, the Kyuubi is sealed into Hashirama's wife to make the first Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The village is saved. Life moves on. So, what's wrong with this picture? I'm sure you plan on telling me. What happened to Madara's body? Sakura chewed on the tip of her pen as she thought aloud. There's no memorial for Madara Uchiha as far as I can remember, and I find that strange to begin with. Wouldn't the Uchiha want to honor their founding member? And even if they didn't, simply because of Madara's betrayal, then why didn't they recover the body for the sake of recovering Madara's eyes? Madara has the strongest Sharingan ever known, and they didn't think to transplant them onto another Uchiha? What if an enemy village got a hold of the body? I know for a fact that the Hyuga go to extreme lengths to preserve their Byakugan, so why didn't the Uchiha do the same for Madara's upgraded Sharingan? That is a very good point. Onaki's face grew serious as he glanced over Sakura's notes. Is it possible the body was recovered in secret? I think whatever happened to the body was a secret, but one we haven't solved yet. Sakura agreed. If the body had been recovered or returned to the Uchiha clan, then it's possible the body was just entombed and the eyes left alone. I feel like that's an unlikely possibility, but it's one we can't leave out. I haven't been to the Uchiha compound, and the only way I could know for sure would be to search it myself, which is probably out of the question. But we can definitely conclude that the Uchiha clan weren't actively using Madara's eyes, because it would have been village knowledge. It would have been impossible to hide that one of the Uchiha was just impossibly stronger than the rest. So, either Madara's body was laid to rest and never disturbed, or something else happened to the body. You think someone else recovered it? I know someone else recovered it. Either that, or someone else managed to replicate Madara's eyes, and we have two mysteries on our hands. I present the incident of the rampage of the nine-tailed fox over a dozen years ago. Sakura turned her notes around so that Oniki can read. It's public knowledge that the Kyuubi attacked Konoha around this time. What we have to ask ourselves is, how did the Kyuubi escape its container? A poor seal. Oniki suggested. Though considering Mito Uzumaki held it for her entire life, that seems unlikely. Uzumaki seals are legendary. Precisely. Sakura agreed. Mito Uzumaki survived childbirth without the seal breaking once. She carried the seal until her death. So what happened with Kushina Uzumaki, the next host, that caused the seal to break? You're thinking sabotage. I am. Sakura nodded. But of course, sabotaging the seal so that the Kyuubi could break free would take someone of considerable power to begin with. They'd not only have to breach village defenses, and whatever guard Kushina might have had with her, but they'd also have to overpower her and ensure that she wasn't capable of strengthening the seal as they tried to weaken it. I think that severely narrows down the list of shinobi who are capable of orchestrating such a thing. And on top of that, say the Kyuubi escapes, rampages, destroys the village like you hope, that still means it's free, and that means it could go rampage anywhere. It's a stupid idea that risks yourself, unless you have the means to control it. I see where you're going with this. Oniki frowned. You think someone with Madara's eyes orchestrated the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha? Someone that could control the Kyuubi once it was done destroying the place. I do. And, if that's the case, if that's true, then there's another, worse conclusion that such a thing leads to. Sakura chewed harder on her pen, grimacing as she did. I think someone with Madara's eyes is leading Akatsuki. They need someone capable of controlling tailed beasts, someone strong enough to break the seals on Jinhuriki and seal the beasts into other people. And if that's the case, Oniki-sensei, Sakura swallowed. I'm scared that Akatsuki might be unstoppable. Bah. Oniki rolled his eyes. The second Tsuchikage and I were able to handle Madara. If there is someone out there with his eyes, we'll be able to handle him too. You, in particular, have been studying under me extensively for the past few months. Do you think I've taught you nothing? No, Oniki-sensei. Sakura protested. I've learned more here than in my entire first year of being a shinobi. Do you think you are not strong enough to take on an Uchiha? Maybe. Then you are foolish. Oniki huffed. Uchiha are as fallible as any other shinobi. Their eyes are strong, but they have their own weaknesses. Hashirama did not take down Madara because his eyes were stronger. He took down Madara because he was a strong and capable shinobi. He had wood release. Sakura argued. Something nobody else has been able to use ever since him. Then you need to find something better than wood release. You need to find something that only Sakura Haruno will ever be able to use, and once you cultivate that, an Uchiha will be no problem. You're a smart girl. You'll figure something out. Oniki stood up in his chair, determined as he spoke. I did not spend all this time training you, working with you on this damn project to hear you intimidated by the mere concept of an Uchiha warrior. I am insulted that you think so little of yourself. Look at all of these notes you've put together. You may have just insinuated more information about the leader of Akatsuki than anyone in any village has managed to put together, and you did so with nothing but your brain. Sakura smiled. Okay, you might have a point. If there is an Uchiha at the helm of Akatsuki, they will not last long. You are about to go on a journey to unite the shinobi world. Do you really think one Uchiha can stand against the united might of every shinobi village on the continent? A united Kage force? The united Jinhuriki? Every powerful shinobi you've ever known, working in harmony. I guess they'd have to be a pretty strong Uchiha, wouldn't they? Sakura closed her notebook, letting herself sigh in relief. Maybe I'm worrying too much. No. I wouldn't say that. Oniki's gaze softened. To worry about such things, you'll need to, as the future develops. If Akatsuki is truly everything you claim, then it might just take a united shinobi front to stop them. And right now, you are the world's best chance. It's enough pressure to make most shinobi buckle. You're not wrong. But you won't. You are my student, and no student of mine gives up that easily. Isn't that right? Yeah. Sakura nodded, standing up as well. You're right, Onaki-sensei. I have to try. I have to do this. And you have less than an hour to get ready for the festival. Onaki pointed out. If my student isn't there, it'll be quite the embarrassment for me, you know. I'll be there, I'll be there. Sakura giggled, gathering her things. But the way you've been talking, it sounds like this festival is going to be different from the other ones. You're not planning anything extravagant, are you? Onaki gave her a small wink before laughing. Me, plan something extravagant? Never in a million years. Sakura knew better than to believe it. Half an hour later, Sakura had changed into her yukata and pulled her hair up into a neat bun. It had started to get long again, and Sakura found herself torn between keeping it short for practicality's sake, or letting it grow long again for, well, it would be for aesthetic, she had to admit it to herself. She had initially let it grow long to impress Suzuki, but now she wasn't so sure. Kuratsuka kept her hair short. In fact, most of the kunoichi in IWA seemed to favor short styles. Harder for an opponent to grab, less likely to get in your eyes. But Tsunade had long hair, and she was a cage. Tsunade was strong to just ensure that no one grabbed her hair. Sakura sighed. She liked to think she looked pretty either way. Maybe she would just see how things went in the future. If it got too bothersome, she could trim it again. She heard a knock on her bedroom door, and she hastily went to open it. She paused as she realized who was on the other side. Gaara was there, wearing a deep magenta yukata. It was slightly big on the boy, but it was the first time Sakura had ever seen him in such attire, and it was admittedly jarring. But Gaara looked nervous, and Sakura wasn't going to be so rude as to visibly look shocked at him wearing it. She put on her biggest grin. You look great. She insisted. Are you excited for the festival? I think Onaki's planning something big, but he won't tell me anything about it. She continued to talk as they exited the apartment. She knew her talking set Gaara at ease, and since this was his first time attending a festival, she figured it was her duty to make sure he had the time of his life. It put her even more at ease when Sai hopped down from a tree to join them. He hadn't dressed up, even Sakura knew better than to expect Sai to wear anything other than his Umbu gear, but he'd still showed up, and after they'd found Kakashi. It was as good a night as she could have wanted. The festival spread out through the center of the village. Brightly colored lights lit up the streets, and dozens upon dozens of vendors could be seen every way Sakura turned. She dragged Gaara and Sai to the games first. They were usually rigged in such a way that Shinobi couldn't get the edge, so it was hilarious to see both Gaara and Sai try, and fail, to win at dart throwing and ball tossing games. It was equally hilarious to see a frustrated Gaara use his sand to knock over the coconut shy stands when he realized that the coconuts were usually nailed to the stand. The dancers eventually drew Sakura's attention away from the games. The outfits and movements were far different from anything she'd seen in Konoha, and Iwa's choice of instruments constructed a unique melody that seemed to echo against the stone walls of the village. But more interestingly, Sai seemed far more interested in the dancing than she did. He stopped every time they came across a new group, an unreadable expression on his face as the music played and the dancers twirled. Sakura wasn't sure how long Sai would be staying with them. At some point, he'd be called back to serve Konoha in a different way. But she figured the least she could do was give him a good time to remember while he was out of Root's influence. And maybe, if she played her cards right, she could use the neutrality project to ensure that no group like Root came into existence ever again. But that was a wish for the far future. It was almost midnight when a hush came upon the square, and Sakura noticed that a crowd had begun to gather. She took Gaara and Sai by the hand and led them deep into the crowd. Whatever was going on, whatever Onaki had planned, she wanted front row seats. It turned out, of course, that she was getting far more front row than she had planned. Onaki himself had set up a stage in the village square, and gathered with him were Kakashi and, to Sakura's surprise, Satomi from the Plains village. People of the village of Uegaku, as your Tsuchikage, I have an announcement to make to all of you. Onaki spoke, his loud voice echoing across the square. Over the past few months, I have been working with several shinobi on a project that I have no doubt will revolutionize the shinobi world. The paperwork I hold in my hands is the draft for a treaty that I hope will formalize neutral relationships between the shinobi villages of the world, and help prevent the need for war in the coming years. This project is being spearheaded by none other than my recent student, Sakura Harano, who leaves IWA tomorrow to take this draft across the world to be signed. The project, however, will begin here with myself and 2 other villages. For the first time since this village's founding, Konoha and IWA will formally be at peace. Sakura's eyes widened as she realized the spectacle Oniki had put together. This was no longer going to be a tight secret. In announcing this in such a public place, with so many people, the word was bound to get out. Everyone was going to know about the neutrality project. Everyone was going to know that she was coming with it. And as Oniki pulled her up onto the stage, Sakura realized that this really was only the beginning. She'd have to get used to this sort of publicity if she wanted the project to succeed, and right here, right now, was the best time to do it. Not only that, she was witnessing history. Konoha and IWA, putting aside the past, putting aside their differences to make way for a better future. Even though she was terrified, she couldn't help but be excited too. As the chosen leader of Iwagakure, as Yurtsuchikage, I hereby claim the right to be the first to sign this treaty of peace. Oniki announced. From there, he handed the pen and paper to Satomi. As the chosen leader of Plains, I, Satomi, announce my village's agreement to ally with the world under this treaty of peace. From there, the pen passed to Kakashi, who somehow looked more nervous than Sakura did. As Konoha's ambassador, until such time as she can sign it herself, I sign this treaty of peace as proxy to the Hokage Tsunade. 3 signatures. 3 villages who had already agreed to the draft that she had been working on for months now. 3 down, probably another dozen to go. But it was a start. It was a start for peace, and whether or not any other village joined in, she had already made a difference by helping IWA and Konoha formally come to peace with each other. With the signatures on the draft, it helped put a bit of her mind at ease. Now all that was left was to enjoy the festival for the rest of the night, until she and Gaara departed for Waterfall the next day. The future was coming, she told herself. A world of peace and happiness. A world without Akatsuki. She could only hope this optimism would last. Check the description for the links to the author.